Okay guys, so we now know that in the body we've got water, and this water is arranged in what is called fluid compartments. This is what we know. We know that this compartment is the intravascular, and the fluid that is found there is plasma. We know that this is the intracellular, and the fluid that is found inside there is cytosol. We also know that in between the cells there is a compartment there, which is the interstitial. And it contains interstitial fluid, right? Now, this fluid is not pure. There are solutes that are dissolved in it and other substances dissolved in this fluid. So it's not pure water. There are electrolytes that are there. What is an electrolyte? If you take, let me take you back to chemistry in grade 9, if I may say. An atom is let me say it's neutral. An atom is neutral, which means you have the same number of positives and the same number of negatives. Just like this. This is just an atom. But once an atom gains electrons or loses electrons, it becomes charged. And when it becomes charged, it's called an ion. So an ion can either be positively charged or it can be negatively charged, depending whether it received electrons or it lost electrons, right? A positively charged ion is called a cation. A negatively charged ion is called an anion, right? So inside the cell, or in all these fluids, you are going to find positively charged ions, which are cations, and negatively charged ions, which are called anions, whether it's here or here or here. And those ions in the body, they are called electrolytes. They are called electrolytes. So these electrolytes are the main solutes in these fluid compartments, and they are the ones that determine the movement of water across this bilipid layer. Whether water is going to move from the interstitial space into the intracellular space or vice versa is dependent on the concentration of solutes or these electrolytes across that bilipid layer, right? Now, it was found that inside the cell there are positively charged ions, which are cations, and there are also negatively charged ions, which are anions, and also on the outside. So what was discovered is that inside the cell, the most abundant cation is potassium. And the second abundant cation inside the cell is magnesium. Right? Okay. So, and also, they also found that the most abundant anion intracellularly is phosphate. Is phosphate, and also some proteins, right? So that's there, and there are others as well, but these are the most important ones. And now, when you go to the outside of the cell in the extracellular space or the cellular fluid, the most abundant cation is sodium. And the second most abundant cation outside the cell in the extracellular fluid is calcium. These are very important, guys. These are very, very important. And then when it comes to extracellular anions, the most abundant is your chloride ions. Second most abundant is your bicarb. Right? Now, this is when now things become interesting. The concentration of these solutes inside the cell, the concentration inside this cell should be the same or very similar to the concentration outside the cell. Right? This is what we want. This is isotonic. When you've got isotonicity across this bilipid layer, it means that whatever amount of water goes inside the cell or diffuses to the inside of the cell will also leave the cell, the same amount. So you won't have net movement of water. You know, when you've got net movement of water, you are gonna have issues. The total concentration of all these solutes around this cell should be equal to the concentration of the solutes inside that cell, so that there is no net movement. Water will move, but there won't be a net movement. Meaning, if, let's say, this is 28 liters, right? If 1 liter moves inside, then 1 liter should leave. Then it means you are able to keep the amount of water in the intracellular space constant. Because you know, if you gain, you've got a positive net movement of water, this cell is going to swell up and burst. We are going to talk about what happens when you've got that kind of a situation. And also, if it happens that you get a negative net movement of water, meaning 1 liter goes in but only 900 mils leave the other side, it means you're going to have a you're going to have a negative net movement. So this cell is going to collapse. So what keeps this cell, it's called the Tagger pressure. What keeps it in shape full is the water that's inside. So you want to keep that water. You want to keep that water. Imagine if you get this kind of disturbance, water moves out, the cell swells up, or it collapses because water is moved out. It happens in the brain. What kind of clinical manifestations are you going to have? Okay, so you don't want that. So the movement of water, this is what I want to you guys to understand. The movement of water from the interstitial space into the intracellular space and vice versa is dependent on the concentration between these two, the concentration of solids. A concentration gradient. You don't want a concentration gradient. You don't want to have a gradient. You want to have isotonicity. The minute you've got a higher concentration this side, then water will be pulled out. The minute you've got a higher concentration inside, water will be pulled in. You don't want that. That's why you must keep your intracellular solutes constant, and also keep your extracellular solutes constant to prevent a net movement of water. I can't over explain that. I'm gonna leave it there. Okay, now dear brothers, so brothers and sisters I should say. Okay, so guys, now if you can come to me and say, I want to do your U&Es, you are interested to know what is the state of my solids in the extracellular space. When we talk about, this is the plasma now, but what is in the plasma is very similar to what is in the outside because of this movement between these compartments, right? So a normal sodium level inside, a normal sodium level in the extracellular space or in the plasma is supposed to be 135 to 145. Some say millimoles or milliequivalent. So 135 to 145, this is the normal amount of sodium. This is outside the cell. This is outside the cell. But inside the cell, you still have sodium, but it's not abundant there. Inside the cell, it's about 12 milliequivalents or millimoles. It's about 12 inside the cell. So you can see these figures, they tell us that really sodium is very abundant in the extracellular space compared to the intracellular. There is sodium inside the cell, but just that it's not a lot compared to the outside. If you talk about potassium is about 150 millimoles inside the cell. But outside, if you take a blood test, outside it's about 3.5 to 5.5 millimoles. So now it tells you that we do have potassium outside the cells in the extracellular space or extracellular fluid, but it's not a lot. You don't want it to be a lot. Okay, let me just bring some clinical insight. When you've got a sodium that is more than 145, you have a pathology. That abnormality is called hypernatremia. right? When you do a blood test to check for sodium and you find it to be less than 135, that's abnormal. It's called hyponatremia. We are going to talk about this, guys, in detail. How do you correct it? How do we diagnose it? What are the clinical features that you expect? That kind of a thing. Now, when you've got potassium that is more than 5.5, that is hyperkalemia. Fortunately, I have done hyperkalemia. If you can check on internal medicine, there's a video I did, I uploaded potassium abnormalities. I explained it very nice there, how what the causes, what causes the shift of potassium, how do you diagnose it, ECG changes, how do you shift potassium, and all of that, and all of that. And also, if it's less than 3.5, that's called hypokalemia. Potassium abnormalities, they give you cardiac complications. They interfere with the electricity of the heart. And sodium abnormalities, you get mainly CNS symptoms and muscle symptoms. There was muscle weakness, that kind of a thing. So this is more, you get CNS symptoms, and here you get cardiac symptoms. Okay. So guys, let me just create space for us here. So guys,